Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It is good to be with you again on this Monday. Um, it has been quite a while. It has been since October 31st since we had Abdaljawad Omar on, which is by far the longest gap in our discussions. Various reasons for that. The main one being that my studio uh, got destroyed and won't be rebuilt until hopefully a couple weeks from now. But anyway, we were able to get our schedules together and get something going this week, which I'm glad. Abdul Jawad has been very busy. There's at least 3 pieces that he's published since we last spoke. We're going to start with his piece, most recent piece, I believe, The Politics of Betrayal. And I'm sure we'll talk about some other, kind of updates and thinking about where things are at with the war, with Palestine, with the genocide, regionally, with the axis of resistance. So anyway, before we start, of course, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Thank you for the contribution right off the bat. Also, I put links in the show description to the piece that we're starting with, which is on Mondoweiss, and also obviously to our Patreon, but also to the Samir Project, which we've done a couple of episodes, one video, one audio, highlighting their work. And I really encourage people to support the Samir Project. They're doing great work on the ground in Gaza, both in the north and in the south. So anyway, without further ado, Abboud, welcome back. It's good to be with you.
Same here, Jared. It's great to be with you again. And yeah, it was a long gap, I guess, between us. A lot has happened as well since then. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get to it later, but just to bridge the gap a little bit, I mean, so there's the ceasefire with Hezbollah happened after that. You wrote about that as well.
Yeah.
And then also the I don't even know the proper term, the proxy war and the sanctions and everything else finally come to a head in Syria, and Assad falls, and then you have now Israel occupying a much larger swath, and who knows where that will all go, but you've written about that as well. So but we're going to start with the most recent piece, which is a very good piece that you wrote on the politics of betrayal. So just kind of start to give people some details of what this operation is. It's called Operation Protecting the Nation, that kind of started you off on writing this piece and thinking about betrayal through multiple different kind of lenses and looking at different aspects of what's going on within Palestinian existence these days.
Well, I mean, I think we can't separate between the last couple of major events and what's happening in terms of the PA taking a more proactive role after all. For the past year or more, we talked about this. The PA basically positioned itself trying as much as possible to sustain the status quo in the West Bank without participating in Tufan al-Aqsa or engaging with the call that accompanied Tufan al-Aqsa when Muhammad al-Dayf, the head of Izzuddin al-Qassam brigades, basically called on forces in the region to actually join or do whatever they can. The PA not only was silent and showed and exhibited a lot of paralysis when it comes to its politics, but also was kind of cheering on Israel's war throughout. But I think the past couple of months, specifically since September, when Hezbollah started to get some hits with the assassination of its leaders and the pager walkie-talkies, and with the let's say Israeli operations being able to extract a heavy price from the social base on which Hezbollah is also reliant in the southern villages and elsewhere. And we should recall that Hezbollah is the major fighting force that is or the Lebanese resistance, and Hezbollah specifically is the major fighting force when it comes um, to any kind of confrontation with Israel. It's the one that had the experience with Israel before, is the one that was involved in Syria before, and the weakness or the weakening of Hezbollah means also the weakening of the entire axis of resistance as a result and as a consequences. So I think that on the heels of these major hits and major breakthroughs that Israel were able to accomplish through this kind of intelligence works that they've done their homework beforehand, and being able to exact a heavy price from the Lebanese resistance, the entire, let's say, edifice of resistance as a political statement that is convincing to the Palestinian and Arab people has slowly been eroded. But I'm not saying eroded in a way that makes it a fait accompli or something like a total form of erosion. But I mean, resistance as a practice and as a concept today is weakened um, in the imagination of the population. Not for everybody, specifically not necessarily for working class Palestinians and young working class Palestinians specifically, for instance. But I think it has been weakened because of the vastness and the scale of destruction in Gaza, but also the inability of the unity of fields to sustain itself throughout the war. Now, I'm not here trying to say that because Hezbollah exited the war, that means that there's a total defeat, whether it's in Hezbollah's confrontation with Israel or whether it is also in the larger confrontation with Israel, including across the axis itself. But yeah, things could have been different. The unity of fields could have persisted. Israel did succeed on a tactical operation level, and we shouldn't really shy away from saying that because it's important. It doesn't mean that the lesson is here that Israel is undefeatable, etc., like some people are trying to argue, or it's time for a more isolationist policy on the part of a lot of these forces that actually, raised the whole anti-hegemonic, anti-imperial slogan in the region, and now might be turning away from it, or at least some within their cohort or within that, let's say, political force are arguing, for a more isolationist, neutral policy when it comes to, engaging with Western powers or engaging with Israel itself. So there is that, and I think Jenin happens at this crossroads where people on the West Bank looking at Gaza and seeing the vastness of destruction, despite the success of the resistance to remain steadfast. Even today, 5 Israeli soldiers were killed in the north of the Gaza Strip, in Beit Hanun, which is north of the Gaza Strip, and 11 were, injured, and 4 were killed yesterday or before yesterday. And so there's a rising toll of soldiers killed or injured in the north of the Gaza Strip more broadly, and it shows this kind of, resistance that is engaging in this attritional, slow, but effective also form of guerrilla warfare that continues to this date. But despite that, the vastness of destruction, the horrific massacres that are happening, its scale and intensity, but also the idea that, we've been witnessing this for the past couple of, 14 months. We've seen, protests emerge in North America. We've seen Israel being more isolated. We've seen, in international legal institutions operating, but still, the genocide didn't seem to stop. No, I mean, there's a level to it to which, what we imagined could happen in these scenarios have happened. It's not that nothing happened. there is people to people solidarity. There is, young people coming out to the street. There are major demonstrations. There is pressure being applied on the, political level. There is some legal moves. There is some, governments decrying Israel's actions. But still, you know, um, on Israel's part, there was more will to continue with their genocide, to continue with their monstrosity. So I think for those of us who live within the domain of Israel's direct power, like in the West Bank, that makes us more, fragile and vulnerable to ideological statements that kind of celebrate or push or advance cooperation with colonialism and imperialism as the way to survive, or at least to remain, take a quietist position, or maintain some sort of politics that negates resistance in its edifice. And I think the PA, has taken that opportunity, this kind of general atmosphere, whether the withdrawal of Hezbollah from the battle after 14 months of fighting, or whether it is, the inability of the solidarity movements and media work to actually, pressure the political classes in many of the countries that have leverage over Israel to actually enact their leverage, or whether it is this feeling that, the intensity and the vastness of destruction in Gaza could be replicated in the West Bank. It has, empowered the PA that this is a time that we can present ourselves as this kind of mature, rational, political force, pragmatic enough to understand that Israel is undefeatable, or let's say a force that cannot be reckoned with directly, and that this young phenomena of resistance in the north of the West Bank, composed of also largely young Palestinians, represents this kind of dreamy, if you want, romantic, perhaps irrational, mad form of politics that we as Palestinians should, at least for now, maintain dormant, and not really truly mess with Israel, to not give it the excuse it wants, according to the PA line. I'm speaking in their voice now. To give the excuse that Israel wants to actually enact what it wants in the West Bank and replicate it as such. So that's a context for the Jenin operation. It's not removed completely from all of the events in the past year and a half, and that's why the PA embarks on it, feeling that it can embark on it at this particular moment, because again of the erosion of the concept and the practice of resistance in the imagination of the people after these 14 months. Remember, I mean, since we started these episodes, and since Tufan al-Aqsa started on October 7th, it's intense months with a lot of events coming on together, historical events that will be spoken about for a long time to come, whether it's the regime of Bashar al-Assad falling in Syria, or whether it's Hezbollah and what happened in the war with Israel, or whether it's also Tufan al-Aqsa itself and the surprise that Israel was dealt with and the blow it had on October 7th, including the persistence of resistance since then. And all of that will be spoken on, and still the work continues. But there's a level of fatigue, I think, and at the same time feeling that this moment of potentiality that arose with Tufan al-Aqsa has started to become more clear, the picture of what might be, if you want, between quotes, the day after. And here I'm not really speaking about only the day after in Gaza, but what exactly, how will this moment that is caught in air actually, where this moment will fall. And at least for now, this Israeli will to monstrosity that we've seen, and has also kind of extracted some sort of cynical acquiescence by the Palestinians, at least in the West Bank, for the moment. And this is the context of the Jenin operation. I'm sorry if I took so long time, but yeah.
No. I mean, I think it's all important context to lay out. I mean, the only thing I would maybe, I don't disagree with anything that you said. I continue to be, I don't know, awe-inspired or something like that by also Yemen and their willingness to continue operations and to also take, you know, the brunt of Israel and the United States also, attacking them for their solidarity efforts. But I agree that you and on top of that, I mean, it is amazing that the resistance, as you said, continues in Gaza, despite all of this. But so talk about then the operation in the West Bank, what's going on, and this, yeah, how you're kind of analyzing that.
Well, I mean, so given the context and given what has happened in the year or so, the PA has been pressured also by the Americans to basically, well, if you want to like take over the Gaza Strip, you need to show us what you can do. There's one level to that. And so go to Jenin, go to the refugee camp, and show us that you can dismantle, a resistance movement, and you can start by the West Bank. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that there's a growing strength to the movement in the north of the West Bank. In the past, despite everything that I said and laid out, growing strength in the sense that Israel hasn't been able to actually really truly dismantle it, despite 3 or 4 years of engagement with it, assassinating key leaders, trying to apply economic pressure, political pressure. We've seen it quite grow. More young people are joining it. The tide around it is not really dwindling as was hoped by Israeli, counterinsurgency efforts and by Palestinian counterinsurgency efforts that were ongoing for the past couple of years. Because the PA now it's fighting with its own men, but it used to fight through rumors and an ideological fight. It used to arrest also people, dismantle a lot of the IEDs. So there has been an active role for the PA throughout the years and months leading to this operation that it's now conducting in the Jenin refugee camp. But it hasn't really dwindled in its presence or expansion or even in the tactical development of the forces on military grounds itself. So the movement has had some successes, but also being present in the north of the West Bank means competing not only with PA ideology, but also competing with PA and its power in these areas. And, for the PA, that is also a danger because it could slowly mean that, resistant forces could emerge elsewhere, not only the north of the West Bank, in Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, and other places, but also in areas in the south, and slowly the entire efficacy of the whole political and economic system that this Palestinian Authority survives on, which is its ability to actually contain Palestinian resistance and able some sort of frictionless colonialism to continue, would become under threat. And for the Israelis, that would mean that those who lead the PA are not useful anymore. So I think that this is a moment where there is also an interest within the PA among its rising leadership, specifically from the security services, those who are, bidding for power after Abbas's eventual death, that there must be a more proactive policy taken. But it's a sensitive topic to actually broach, because I think even within the PA there's resistance to these form of operations. Generally speaking, for instance, there wouldn't be much resistance, for instance, for indirect support, or for rumors, or for forms of politics that does not involve Palestinian security forces engaging directly with Palestinian resistance fighters. So this kind of direct clash is something that generally is one that the PA and a lot of its caters, a lot of the people that operate on whether it's second tier leadership or third tier leadership, or many within it would have voiced some concern about moving ahead with an operation that would pit them against the resistance fighters directly, not only out of fear for what political repercussions that would have in terms of legitimacy, but also because in Palestinian society, which is a relatively small society where people know each other and there are family connections, and when you kill somebody, it might become personal, it might become a family feud, not only one that is political. So there's that level of how much blood could be spilled and by whom. And even if the PA promises the security services officers that are on the ground that it will protect them vis-a-vis, let's say the tribal structure of Palestinian society, or some of the tribal norms that it has, including, blood being held, or, if you kill somebody, the family is held responsible for your killing. And not only you as an individual. That's what's a bit different than, for example, liberal forms of, legal systems where, only the individual is responsible for his actions. Where in familial societies like ours, if you do something, the whole family is held responsible, not only yourself in some context. And I don't want to hear, sound Orientalist with this, but, there is some level to it, and it's not everywhere. And in some parts of Palestine, it's more than other parts in Palestine, etc. But, we're not here going to talk about tribal laws and how it manifests in Palestine. But there's a level to that where if you're engaging in this direct confrontation, a young Palestinian security officer killing his fellow Palestinian might lead to something more than simply a political, it wouldn't seem just in political light. It could also turn into personal, familial, and that has repercussions on the entire fabric, if you want, of our society as such. So there's a lot of reticence around engaging in such direct confrontations, whether it's from the resistance fighters themselves or from, the Palestinian security forces. Even in the past, you would hear a lot of news, perhaps for those who were following Jenin, about, young, the resistance fighters shooting at Al-Muqata'a in Jenin, which is the headquarters of the Palestinian security forces. But they would never shoot at officers themselves, or kill officers, or assassinate officers. There would always be this kind of unspoken norm that, we should avoid this kind of internal bloodshed, despite standing quite opposite to each other. And the PA is the first to really take the move to move from a specific set of techniques and tactics trying to contain and dismantle the resistance movement in the north, to now moving towards this form of direct confrontation. But even in the direct confrontation, it's not going all out. No, it's placing a siege, it's engaging slowly, it's trying to apply political and social pressure. At the same time, it's engaging in gun battles. There are people who are killed in these gun battles, including from within the Palestinian security forces, but we're still not seeing the type of intense battle that you might expect because of these, social, familial, tribal, if you want, concerns that emanate also or are tied to Palestinian, let's say, social structures and cultural norms that also play a significant role here. So, you know, the PA breaking this taboo against, let's say, the direct fighting and engaging with it, I think is the hallmark of at least this campaign for now. It's trying to say that it's present. And I don't think it's completely just specifically tied to its operation in Jenin. The past month or so, we've seen, wherever you go in the West Bank, the Palestinian security forces deployed, you know, issuing tickets against traffic violations, which for us here is kind of a seasonal thing that the police does. It's never really, a consistent form of like procedure, and it has to do, generally speaking, with the reason why it's seasonal is because people don't find the PA quite legitimate. So generally, the PA avoids doing a lot of stuff that would only accumulate the anger or like people's disdain. But now I think they want to make their presence felt, and that's why their security presence in all the cities and wherever they have any form of presence is more visible, visual, apparent, and they're engaging in this kind of like campaign that is tied to what is happening in Jenin, fearing that these things might spill in other parts of the West Bank. So they're doing some form of preventive measures that would enable them to control things if things go out of hand. But at the same time, I think it's also meant to show their strength and their presence across the various geographies of the West Bank itself as well. So this is also a part of, let's say, the picture at this moment. It's important to just for people also to grasp is that not only is there this taboo against Palestinian blood being spilled, which doesn't mean that in the past historically it hasn't. There is a lot of Palestinian infighting, including more infamously when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip and was able to drive the Palestinian Authority and its security forces out of the Strip, or at least the leadership of these security forces out of the Strip. And there were hundreds of Palestinians killed in these, intense bouts of fighting between Palestinians and between different political forces. And there's torture between, the different factions. And even in Lebanon, if we go to the PLO period, there was a lot of factional infighting. And so I'm not saying that, so nobody gets me wrong, that there's no bouts of blood between Palestinians. There's quite a lot of episodes of that as well throughout Palestinian history, including also confrontation between projects that took the mantle of cooperation with Israel, like the Brigades of Peace in the 1936 revolt or revolution in Palestine, that were operating on behalf of the British, or the village leagues in the 1980s that also held guns, and there were assassinations, and there were also mutual assassinations of activists or key leaders within the village league from Palestinian political forces at that time as well. So there are these bouts in history, and I'm not saying that this is quite completely new or completely unparalleled. I don't think so. But I think what its importance comes specifically to kind of tell us, first of all, something about the weakness of, let's say, the option of resistance conceptually and practically after like 14 months of fighting, with the fatigue, with some feeling of defeat, specifically when it comes to forces like Hezbollah that people had a lot of hope in. And at the same time, a feeling that the scale of destruction in Gaza may perhaps makes October 7th was not worth it. And the third element, and I think it's important, is that the PA is also attempting to prevent what is and still is a growing movement in the north of the West Bank, one that has the potential to create, if you want, a zone outside of the direct influence of the PA, erode its power, and perhaps become something like what Idlib was to the remainder of the Syrian rebels that remained in Idlib and were able to launch this offensive deep within Syrian territory as well. Meaning that you could underestimate your rising force until it becomes one that is capable and has the capacity to both govern, to produce its own leaders, can build its alliance system, and can create an alternative to your own leadership or your own governance system. And I don't see that the movement in the North and West Bank is still an alternative to be at all. And I don't think the movement itself sees itself as such, because I think they want to stay as much as possible away from governance and the burden of governance. But at the same time, I think that there is that potential. And that potential for the PA is also risky to maintain without, trying to fight it head on. Not to mention, again, the American pressure being applied on this leadership to do something proactive and prove its own edifice, and its own power and prowess in terms of defeating a resistance movement. Because if it wants to play a role in a post, war in Gaza situation, it will have to also face a lot of resistance from an organized resistance movement in the Gaza Strip. And I think all of these coming together are pressuring the PA to take a stance, and that's why they move towards this direction, feeling the strength of their own political program at this moment, which is a politics which is built on this politics of betrayal, feeling that their ability to mobilize young Palestinian men and placing them in fighting positions where they embezzle the Palestinians to not shoot at them is also another level of this. People are trying, or the resistance fighters are trying as much as possible to not kill or hurt any other Palestinian in this confrontation as well. And protecting itself and protecting its own future by ensuring that no alternative can come in the West Bank, even in areas that are have been or remain marginal in the thinking of most of the PA leadership and elite, which is like Jenin and Jenin refugee camp more particularly.
Yeah, that point that you made there briefly, just about the ability to recruit young Palestinians into the security forces, was something that stood out to me within the essay. And I mean, I think this, one, I'd love for you to just to talk a little bit more about what you attribute that to or think that means, but also this, you're in the piece, you're kind of, you've already laid a lot of it out, but you're talking about that given, the last 14 months, that there is a kind of, that the politics of resistance, right, seem less ideologically strong among non-resistors, essentially, right, within Palestinian society, and meaning that people, I guess, the cost, the price of it is so high, right, and that conversely, that there is a politics of cooperation that you see perhaps gaining momentum. And I thought that was interesting, because I think there's also been a lot of people who have felt, as you do, as you articulated in the piece, as you feel betrayed by the fact that, the PA has done nothing, a meaningful, to show real kind of any kind of meaningful solidarity with the resistance from Gaza, and frankly, quite the opposite. and especially, now intensifying its own security operations against resistance forces in the north of the West Bank. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to say more about that, but that stuck out to me as far as that young people would be interested in joining up with the PA at this time.
No, I mean, I don't think it's young people are interested in joining. I mean, people join the PA because of material, you become a police officer or a security officer for two reasons. First, you get a constant pay, specifically if you're coming from a working class background and you want some sort of symbolic recognition or power within society, and also some sort of steady material inflow of income. And we're generally speaking about people who join the Palestinian security forces are generally people who don't go to university. They might have gone to school, maybe left at some point from school. Even in recruitment towards the Palestinian security forces, they actually condition you not to have tawjihi, which is like the secondary school exam, something like, I don't know, the SATs in the US, if that's still going on. So there's that, element to it, which is that they're recruited young, they're placed within the system that gives them like minimal pay. They get some sort of symbolic power, which is becoming a police officer, Palestinian security officer. Much of these young men are not that ideological, and then therefore they can be, directed through this kind of nuanced politics of nationals. I mean, the whole operation called Protecting the Nation it's not just a cynical rhetorical ploy. No, it's meant to signal something, not to me and you, Jared, but to the people actually loyal to the PA, or that want to have some sort of discourse that can protect, and give some sort of legitimate justification for what the PA is conducting and doing within this kind of ideological, political fault lines within Palestinian society, including from within this working class security officer Palestinians who, are recruited and become part of the system and its sociality, and therefore, tend to be not very critical of its choices and decisions. Having said that, I mean, from the beginning of the operation, there are a lot of Palestinian young men as well who are in the security services and who refused to join this operation. And some of them were actually jailed by the Palestinian authorities. So when you're a security officer or you're a intelligence officer and then you're asked to do this operation, a lot of resistance to it comes from people who either turn their phone off or try to stay away from this, or who are asked to do this operation and who refuse to actually engage with it. So there are a lot of Palestinians within the security forces who refuse to engage in this operation, which is sometimes a moment where also the system kind of knows who's more loyal and who's more willing to go all the way in, who's willing to torture, who's willing to kill, who's willing, there's these moments where people are filtered based on their loyalty and, I would say, the intensity and of their corruption, morally and politically. And within the PA system, that is rewarded, because these are the people that generally become leaders within the Palestinian security forces. They become more influential in leading the security agencies. They become, the second-tier officers and the first-tier officers, and eventually perhaps also would play a role in the future in who's a president or who's a prime minister. And so I think that these are the moments where, some sort of filtering happen, and, people choose based on consciousness, based on their political leanings, based on their willingness or not willingness to actually engage in this kind of internal civil fighting that is happening. And that has happened before as well. It's not that much studied, but it has happened quite a lot. Even when people speak a lot about Dayton, for instance, which is an American general that restructured the Palestinian security forces and helped set up training exercises in Jordan, and who claimed in 2000, I think, and 7, something like that, that the mission of the American forces training the Palestinians is to create a new Palestinian. One of the elements of that was that even a lot of Palestinians who joined the Dayton force or either left the security services after all, or rejected to continue down that line. Some of them did, some of them did not. So there's these moments where things filter out, and in this case as well, some of the Palestinian security forces rejected the offer to engage in a civil war in the north of the West Bank, and some of them actually engaged in it. That's at least part of the equation as well. But having said that, I think the ability of the PA to basically direct this kind of economic flow, this monthly pay, giving some young Palestinian men symbolic power within Palestinian society through their structure, means that they're able to pit the bodies of these young men as a form of embezzlement towards those who want to resist. That's actually the power of the PA. It's not really truly their capacity to conduct military operations. We can speak a lot about the efficacy of their security forces, to what extent they have morale, to what extent they're convinced of what they do, to what extent they're effective or professional in what they do. That's for another conversation, and perhaps that should be studied more. I mean, I don't think it's about their professional counterinsurgency in terms of techniques or tactics or operational capacity, but because I think on that level, I don't think that there's anything significant to say there. But the power is generally symbolic and political and ideological. And in this context, just being able to recruit Palestinian men, giving them this monthly pay and symbolic position, driving them towards a fight with Palestinian resistance fighters, also young Palestinian men, also with a symbolic position in society, and creating this moment where the bullets and the energy and the fighting is more of an internal, internal one that exhausts the population, that makes things blurry. Not because, again, people don't know that what the PA is doing is wrong. They know it's wrong, but there's a level to it, is that when you have like this kind of son that is doing wrong things and is being a neighborhood bully, you still want to you're still sympathetic to him because he's still your son, and he's still somebody who you care about deeply, and he's still somebody that you want to like reform or fix, or at least you don't want to engage in a fight with. These type of internal fights are quite heavy in this kind of small society where people know each other, where the PA can produce some sort of political statements that support its positions, coming on the heels of a feeling that there is some sort of defeat happening and Gaza has been destroyed and resistance doesn't reach you anywhere. Look what happened to Gaza. That type of things that we shouldn't give Israel an excuse. These young men, they're good, but they're doing something wrong, and Iran is playing with them, and they're just stooges of Iran. So that's the discourse that is happening within PA circles, and that's why it kind of exhausts the population, and it blurs and confuses and disorients, and at the same time it embezzles the fighters with bodies from within the Palestinian community being placed and pitted against them, where the act of firing a gun becomes much more hesitant, less forceful, if you want, and to the extent possible, you don't want to like engage in this gun battle or fight, which is in the context of an Israeli operation in Jenin would not be the case. No, you know, there's no hesitation when it comes to Israeli soldiers coming in. They will engage in a battle. Things are clear. There's no a lot of disorientation. There might be fear because Israel has much more firepower, but this kind of internal fighting, this kind of fitna is not happening. So that's the strength of the PA. I mean, the strength is to exhaust the reservoir of support for resistance. The idea of placing the specter of civil war, even its initial, let's say, motions, as a means to kind of dismantle the resistance. Because do you want to have a civil war or do you want to have a resistance? I mean, that becomes like the equation. And what is strong on the part of, let's say, the PA, at least on a social basis, even in Jenin, is that on a completely pragmatic and everyday level, the PA holds the levers towards things like electricity, organizes the health sector, organizes education. So there is a level of influence that the PA has that transcends its security role, but it's part of and parcel of its presence, and where movements like the young one being rising in Jenin and in the refugee camp and in Tulkarem and others, they don't have the capacity to create a model of social organization, and not only armed movement. There is some sort of social organization around these armed movement, but not well developed enough to answer the question of everyday life, if you want, and its continuity. No, so all of this is happening all at once. But again, the strength of the PA is not in its tactical maneuvering on the ground. I mean, Israelis, special operations units are much more capable of reaching activists or using their intelligence to like assassinate key leaders, or using their drones and high tech equipment and training. And on that level, I mean, the PA's strength lies specifically in pitting Palestinians against Palestinians, in exhausting the Palestinians through their own kind of internal fighting.
Yeah, I mean, you said on some level, I mean, this is where there are different schools of thought on counterinsurgency. I mean, there is the school of thought that is more militaristic, more capture and kill the leaders, take out all of the insurgents. And on that level, you're saying, as I hear you, that the PA is not, has not historically been effective or impressive. But what you're describing in terms of their effectiveness sounds a lot like how, which makes sense since this is who trained them and all that. But the U.S. style counterinsurgency, as it is supposed to work, which it usually hasn't, but is to create that feeling that if you go to war, you're going to be going to war against your own people, and that that, as you say, these bases of social existence, the kind of civil society, that because there are many places where people interact with the PA and get things that they need from the PA on a daily basis and see them as their people, even if they don't like what they're doing, right? You talked about the son who's a bully or whatever, that there is still that reality that they see them, they don't necessarily want to go to war with them. They don't necessarily want to direct their insurgency primarily at them. I guess one of the questions I would have, which I think you talked about a little bit earlier on, but is this notion that that doing this is to demonstrate something to Israel, to demonstrate something to the United States. And I think the question that that brings is, and I think you did allude to this, that, perhaps whenever this war does end, or whenever there is a day after, that this is them demonstrating a capacity for counterinsurgency and control that they could then take on in Gaza, which might be, which Israel would prefer, because then if there is continued resistance in Gaza, then it would have to be the resistance factions fighting against PA forces in Gaza rather than their own. I don't know if that's what you're hinting at or thinking about down the line, but it comes to mind for me.
No, yeah, I mean, I think there is a level to that. Is that Gaza is still. I mean, again, Gaza. I don't think Israel has been, to be like very careful in my wording, successful. And because there are different ways how people measure success and different arguments. Some people say that Israel's ability to destroy Gaza and make it, unlivable, destroy its built environment and its infrastructure, creating this kind of like, urban side, or killing the city, will, perhaps in the long term force the Palestinian population within Gaza to leave the Gaza Strip, and it would, be this kind of slow process of ethnic cleansing, etc. I think Israel's conduct in Gaza, its war in Gaza, despite a lot of what it says to itself and it kind of spreads around as propaganda in terms of the success in dealing with a lot of the Palestinian resistance fighters, including, killing around what they claim is 17,000 fighters, or, destroying much of the infrastructure. And, they keep bringing up this whole battalion, Hamas were battalions and now they're not battalions. Okay, I mean, that's their claim to fame. And I don't think all of that actually is just transpiring towards a total defeat like Israel wants it. And if we see some sort of agreement in the horizon, there's only one way Hamas would stop leading Gaza, which is that Hamas decides through agreement to stop, being in governance in Gaza. And of course, that doesn't mean that it will stop, its resistance movement and its presence. There is a level to success, after the pain of what's happening in Gaza, the destruction. I don't think the Palestinians in Gaza will have a lot of taste for resistance for a long time, and perhaps will have, they want to rebuild their lives and stop the war machine from its killing, and maybe there will be something after this kind of horizon of daily death ends, where Palestinians go in different direction. Who knows? But I don't think Israel was or is successful in Gaza. And I think this is something that people should at least, grasp. I think they were more successful on other fronts. And I think they were more ready for these other fronts. It's not surprising for us to learn that in the beginning of the war, Israel wanted to actually hit Lebanon first, because it seemed it had, designed operations for Lebanon much more than it did for Gaza. It seemed in Gaza it had only one solution, which is destroying its own reputation in the world and wagering itself and its people on the rise of the right-wing fascists in the West that will come and protect it and become more like it. So this is Israel's wager now. This is its future. Other than that, its reputation has been destroyed. International legal mechanisms are turning against it. There's a lot that it lost also in terms of its standing in the world, etc., etc. And I don't want to go and rehearse that. So I don't think necessarily that it has been as successful as many people are making the argument for when it comes to the war. Despite things could have turned differently, in other arenas, perhaps, if its intelligence was more shaky or incompetent, it wouldn't have been able to succeed where it did. Also, even in Lebanon, it didn't succeed completely. It had to reach a ceasefire. Like people have these arguments. I don't want to. I don't want to go into them too much. But I think that what is central, at least for a lot of people, because there's three directions that people come to this. Some who saw in Tufan al-Aqsa and its start the horizon for a immediate form of liberation and this kind of big regional war that might end, a Western hegemony over the region, and that's why they got excited, and based on that excitement, based on that imagination of what is possible, at least at that moment, they're now kind of defeated. There's that level to it. There are the others who are already defeated and who are just waiting to like have enough of an argument to claim that we're defeated and repeat the cycle, because that's their psychological position in the first place. And there's a lot of those people around, because a lot of the regimes in the region, a lot of the political interests around these regime, depend on defeat and its eternalization. It's ingrained not only in the psyche of a people, but it's also ingrained in how these regimes perpetuate themselves in time. I mean, there's no justification for the Sisi regime if defeat was not part and parcel of how Egypt has to look at itself, its past, and of course its future. Same with Jordan, or same with other regimes in the region that are heading towards normalization, or trying as much as possible to accommodate the presence of the United States and America, and also benefit from it and leverage it in their own internal fights against rival political forces, whether ideological or political or otherwise. So that's another level to how people come to it. And there's the actual war and what's happening, and to what extent can this war, be broached through what it revealed from truth? To what extent are some forces willing to actually engage in the war? To what extent are they willing to sacrifice? Who will buck first? Who will, go all in? Who will, all of these things are also quite important, because I think they also reveal quite a lot about the world, the political forces we live in, the implosions of certain institutions, the readiness of Israeli army to fight when it's surprised. There's a lot of things that was revealed in the past year or so. I mean, not only in the in terms of Israel, its dependency on the empire, its dependency on American largesse. It's it looked, and it still looks, quite more like Ukraine than a autonomous power that dominates the region, despite the effort of the Western mainstream media to create it as such. I think that it's a dependent colony with the need for financial flows to be uninterrupted, with the need with arms to be interrupted, incapable of fighting this kind of long war without this kind of uninterrupted supply of war. I mean, I think a lot of people have come to this realization. There's a lot of things that are, ideological, political truths that are revealed. Some we knew perhaps, but we didn't recognize completely. Some we recognize and now are affirmed. And I think some are new in certain instances. So there's all of that happening. So this is this like historic toll. But one of them, which is I think important, at least when we're discussing this whole, PA position and the West Bank, and is that there is a lack of social political forces that are energetic and young in the Arab world, specifically among the middle class populations. This is one of the effects of the Arab Spring, is that you have armed movements that might combine with social movements. But if we want to look at the middle classes in Egypt or in Jordan or in, there is a weakening and eroding power of movements that combine either different political social classes, I'm sorry, or that have the ability to actually mobilize people, engage in politics quite forcibly. And I think that is true for also the West Bank itself. You have a armed movement, but less of a middle class organized social movement that can, draw itself to it or legitimate it more, or both operating in tandem together to challenge the PA and its leadership. So that's one of the problems. And I think it's not a problem only in the West Bank. It's a problem in Egypt. It's a problem in Lebanon. It's a problem everywhere. And I think one of the elements of that is that why I'm saying that is that also tells us something about another important facet of the Gaza war, which is that the destruction and the scale and the intensity of the massacres and the repetition and their normalization, because I think people at some point cannot even fathom the extent of pain that is happening on repeat, and therefore they disavow it to sustain their sanity. Is that we haven't seen of politics or street politics in the Arab world emerging. There were efforts like the Houthis in Yemen or Ansarullah in Yemen or the Hezbollah and the Axis resistance. They are already organized armed social movements that are operating. And one of the things that would scare me personally is the idea that if these forces read their battle with Israel at this juncture as a defeat, that's the real defeat. No, that they internalize the defeat, they move away from this politics of confrontation and anti-imperialism and anti-hegemony, and they start engaging on the level of the nation state. They become a shadow of their former selves, and what is more scary is not that only these forces would withdraw from the politics, is that the second element to it is that there's no real, at least for now, there's no real, movements or ideologies or thinking that you can point towards that will come and define politics in the region in the future, So like, not only if these forces withdraw, you have a problem, but also you can't see the beginnings of a new forces. And that's why some people are reading this, at least when it comes to the region, that there's a vacuum emerging, at least in the moment, in any kind of organized social political movements, specifically emanating or have to do with the upper or social middle classes, if you want, more broadly. Professionals or people who are doctors and engineers and people who have some sort of political consciousness and want to change the system, and from which political parties like the Islamic Brotherhood drew a lot of their social base, and also political parties like the Arab nationalists, etc., also drew a lot of their base. So there's this kind of lack in these terms from these kind of middle classes and their role, where they are, what form of ideas will emerge in the future as dominant ones. Are we in this kind of moment where there's revolutionary ebb and flows, and maybe we're in this kind of ebb, but at least after like a year or so of war, but what comes in terms of political forces in the future? And this is, I think, this is also an important one. Is it the Gulf nation states, their version of capitalism, their version of making amends with imperialism and engaging in this politics of cooperation and normalization with Israel that will triumph as as the major political slogan of in the Arab world, or what will actually triumph, or what will actually emerge in the coming future. I think that that's one of the elements that would worry anybody who's observing the region and who wants to see a future that does not include the brute form of colonialism and imperialism that this region has suffered from for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is a difficult aspect to talk about of all of it, but you're kind of going there. I mean, in your piece, you mentioned certain folks who kind of have turned against the axis of resistance, or suggested that it wasn't real, or it didn't have any wasn't really fighting, and obviously this comes, I mean, on one level, I think that point obviously is, I think both of us disagree with it. Obviously the Hezbollah, um, you know, for a long time was definitely, firing missiles every day, and whether it could have done more, whatever. Like, that's not really, I don't think, something that we can assess that well from. I certainly don't think I can. Um, and then you have Ansar Allah, but I think particularly with what happened in Syria, and then you know so you have this, as you said, a force that had developed some infrastructure and whatnot in Idlib. I mean, I would, obviously with a lot of support from Turkey and support from the West, um, but then yeah, they're able to basically move through the country in a matter of days. It just falls. The regime didn't have the support to continue to fight the Syrian government at the time. And so that this occurs, and again, after, decade plus of proxy war that had all kinds of, you know, US, Russia, Gulf states pouring all kinds of money into different groups in the region. But then you have, and of course, this happened right after Hezbollah's ceasefire as well, which Hezbollah had been a really important fighting force on the side of the Syrian, Syrian government, Syrian army. And I haven't followed this so closely, but it seems also that Iran, that there are more discourses now about, kind of, we need to pull back a little bit, focus on ourselves. And so do you see those things as kind of producing this vacuum that you describe? Or I mean, I know you say, it could be an ebb and a we could be in a low tide that resurges, and not all I mean, it doesn't seem to me that Ansar Allah is going along right now with that program of, we're just going to walk away from this. But yeah, anyway, I don't know if you have thoughts
No,
on
I
that.
mean, I don't think when it comes to, I mean, look, for anybody who wants to, there's a lot of propaganda, Jared, out there, even for the axis of resistance. There's a lot of like propagandizing on behalf of, forces in the region that fight against, American imperialism. But and in that propaganda, what is sometimes effaced is that, these movements have social governance, politics, internal contradictions, villages from which people are born, everyday realities. When it comes to Hezbollah, that kind of is wedded to the Shia community of Lebanon. There's a lot of contradictions. Doesn't mean that it's not genuine, but there's a lot of things going on at the same time. Other political rival forces that are also, sit in tandem with Hezbollah in the villages, like Amal movement, or that are more isolationist. In fact, represented by Nabih Berri, etc. That engaging in an anti-imperial, anti-hegemonic type of politics is costly, and it's costly on people in terms of livelihoods, in terms of losing loved ones, in terms of, it's not an easy feat, and there's a lot to be paid around that. And again, this is not, if people if any movement in the acts of resistance sees its support of Palestine because of Palestinians, that is a quite a stupid position to take. I mean, if you're just supporting Palestinians for Palestinians are also like, we could be really horrible people, and we could, I don't think you should support us for who we are as a people. I think we're the greatest people in the world, but some people might disagree with that. But anyways, beyond this chauvinism that I'm joking around with, what I mean is that when Hezbollah fights, it's not fighting because it wants to stand in solidarity only, or do the ethically right thing. I know that a lot of the discourse is around that, but it's also fighting because if it's true to its own anti-hegemonic claims that it wants to, liberate the region from the influence of U.S. Imperialism and its local allies, and of course Israel as being the major fighting force for that imperialism in the region, then it will have to confront Israel. So that's one element to it. The second element to it is that wars are tricky. One day you can be on top, the second day you can be shattered. And that's the problem with wars. They're not a defined moment. It's not a in retrospect you can say, oh, I told you so. But Hezbollah, for instance, gave Gaza and the Palestinian Tufan al-Aqsa 14 months of fighting. It engaged in that fight. It could have also not engaged in it. It could have chosen a different way of engagement. It did. So for 14 months, it did an attritional warfare against Israel. On some level, it was successful in, destroying at least, the belief and the strength of the settlements in the north and those who live in it, of the durability of their settlement project there. It created a lot of problems in terms of insecurity in the Galilee area. So there's a lot of effects that are also important. It wasn't totally defeated when its leadership was decapitated. When Israelis came into the southern Lebanon, it found that there's still a fierce resistance, and they were losing a lot of soldiers between injured and killed, and a lot of tanks, and so it wasn't an easy also fight for the Israelis. But of course, there are voices not only in this war but before this war, from within, let's say, the Shia community, from within also Hezbollah itself, that wanted perhaps a more isolationist, quietist, less confrontational politics. And perhaps now they'll be the ones that are arguing an argument that resonates on some level with some people. Maybe they won't win this kind of ideological fight. It depends how these movements now interpret what happened. Do they interpret it as a moral, political defeat for an entire idea, or they, interpret it as a tactical and operational failure on some level, and then correct it and then try to find solutions for it. So it depends how people interpret this defeat and how they move on from this moment. The same goes for a movement like Hamas. The same goes also for other people. When it comes to Ansar Allah in Yemen, yes, they're not backing off. They just, I just read, 30 minutes ago, threw a ballistic missile or launched a ballistic missile against Israel. And they're also an effective player on the Red Sea. There's no real, practical solution. The Israelis have very little intelligence when it comes to Ansar Allah as well. Yet they're showing some air power capacity by, going and hitting Yemen. But other than that, I think until now, there's not a lot of effective solutions for how the Houthis will, or the Ansar Allah will succumb to American imperialism, specifically for a fighting force that has been under 10 years of bombardment, and who are now engaged in what is quite a popular policy in Yemen overall. So I'm not sure what they will come up. I'm not sure even if they assassinate people, if that's going to be a solution that they think will be successful with Ansarullah or not. But at least for now, Ansarullah is not backing off and still expanding its operations to the extent that it's possible. And remember, also in Gaza, the fighting didn't stop. I mean, every day since October, there's 50 Israeli soldiers killed. So these are not very marginal numbers when it comes to a guerrilla fighting force that is engaging the Israeli military, whether in the south of the Gaza, but also specifically in the north of the Gaza, and the operation that is happening now in Beit Hanun and other areas of North Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of where I wanted to go next, is just kind of how you read the overall impacts on Israeli society, on Israeli government at this point. The military attrition, and kind of the economic situation too. What is the sense that you are getting in terms of kind of where Israel is at in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, just before that, I forgot one thought that I wanted to throw out there. Also, that
Sure.
there's been a lot of talk about unity of field, and some people have argued that unity of field is the problem. That's why things went worry. And I think, or for Hezbollah, for instance, or for other fighting forces, I think that's a mistaken reading of the moment. I think without the unity of fields, the situation of Hezbollah would have been worse. Not because if it fought a war alone with Israel, and Israel had all of these operational designs, including the walkie-talkies and pagers, and the intelligence that enabled it to reach its leadership, the political and military leadership of Hezbollah. And this was a war that it fought from the beginning only with Lebanon and against Hezbollah itself. I think that we could have seen an even worse outcome come from this war. I think the fact that Israel had to fight a war in Gaza and then move to Lebanon, the fact that it had for a whole year to engage in a bloody war in the Gaza Strip, actually helped a lot of the forces in the region, and specifically in this case, the Lebanese resistance. So just giving the line there that people might read this as a failure of the unity of fields. I think that we should be careful about reading it in this sense. I don't think unity of fields failed. I think there are failures that maybe perhaps have to do with to what extent there were perhaps coordination, a will to fight, who was prepared, who wasn't prepared, all of these different mechanisms that are operating in tandem. But at least one of the benefits of the unity of fields is that, Lebanon the Lebanese resistance was able to leverage Israeli engagement in Gaza, the willingness of Israeli and the distaste for a long war in Lebanon that is also emanated from the fatigue that was happening in Israeli society around the Gaza war itself. And of course, its own fighting and its capacity to still hit everyday rockets on the north and show some of its remaining power, specifically in fighting Israeli army within southern Lebanon. That is at least one element of it. Look, I think Israeli society in September had, quite a lot of successes, whether it's in relation specifically with its war in Lebanon. And there was a high, and that high was tied to assassinating Hassan Nasrallah and showing some of the intelligence / air power capacity that they have. There was a high also in where we're able to destroy Gaza. We have a better strategic position. And that kind of continued with the killing of Yahya Sinwar and his martyrdom later in October, and then with this rapid regime collapse in Syria. That was credited to Israel at some level, specifically by Israeli politicians. So all of these in tandem created this kind of strategic position where a lot of Israeli analysts, Israeli strategic thinkers, are saying our strategic condition has changed and it has shifted positively in our side. You have a weakened Hezbollah that now will have to fight off internal foes in Lebanon, looking to weaken it even further politically and socially and economically, and choke its ability to rejuvenate itself also militarily. It's the major voice, the charismatic voice that Hezbollah had embodied in Nasrallah has been killed and martyred. So now there's a vacuum there, and also Syria and taking over some parts of Syria as the Israeli army has done. Cutting the supply route for Hezbollah from Iran through Iraq and Syria towards Lebanon. These are all the arguments that were been made and are being made within Israeli press around how Israeli army and intelligence was able to create a strategic shift in Syria and Lebanon specifically, and weaken Iran's influence over an entire swath of land that generally went from West Afghanistan to the Mediterranean Sea or Lebanon. So there is that reading in Israel, this changing strategic landscape. Some of the discussion now is revolved around what to do with Iran. Trump is coming. Are they going to engage in a direct hit against Iran? And will Trump actually go for, a hit that will actually target all of the nuclear capacity that Iran has? Whether there will be some sort of regional war, whether Trump will choke Iran economically even further. So the big question among Israeli strategists is we still have an opportunity to drag the U.S. into a major war with Iran, or into at least convincing the Americans that the Iranians will absorb any blow to their nuclear program without responding in any significant way, and that you should go on and do it, or at least allow Israel, or give Israel the capacity to it on their own. So there's that discussion in Israel going on, and I think it's an important discussion for what could this year also hold in terms of what would happen in the next couple of weeks or months. The second discussion, and I think that is relevant, is that after the end of the war in the north, Israel has showed a sign of pragmatism of ending the war. So, of course, coming on the heel of some successes, but it still showed some sign of we could end this war, and we could end the fighting in some front. And I think that also pushed the discussion socially within Israel towards the necessity of a deal that will recuperate Israeli prisoners that the Palestinian resistance are holding captive in the Gaza Strip, meaning that there's a definite fault line between the right-wing national Zionist camp, represented by people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are arguing one way or another for the continuation of the war, the swallowing up of north of the Gaza, ethnically cleansing the remaining population of the north of the Gaza, and not allowing people to return, and building settlements, and engaging in this long drawn process of transferring population and transferring population out, and maintaining this kind of posture of war for war's sake, if you want. In between, I think the rest of Israeli society that are sick of the war, that want the prisoners to come back, and that are now looking for an agreement that even ends the war itself. In the meantime, the increasing deadly toll of soldiers at this moment being killed in the Gaza Strip is also, being amplified. Not like the beginning months when Israeli society had, if you want, a more tolerance towards people killed or injured in action. I think we're seeing signs that of frustration among a large part of the Israeli society around the reasons and the rationale behind the operations that are happening in the Gaza Strip, whether they will actually be successful, to what extent what they're doing is basically, with no real strategic efficacy at this moment, and that their sons and their people are being killed in the Gaza or injured without any real purpose, and that what Israel needs now is a ceasefire agreement with the Palestinian resistance. And that's why I think there's an increasing talk around at least the first phase of a ceasefire coming, including Trump being coming into the picture, maybe some sort of transactional arrangement that is happening between Israel and the US on that level. But yeah, there is a lot of talk about the possibility that this time there's a seriously and a possibility for a ceasefire agreement to emerge, maybe a temporary one, but at least one that would see a prisoners exchange and stopping of the fighting and some limited withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Strip as well.
Yeah, we'll see. There definitely is a lot of discussion of that, going on right now, more than it has been for quite some time, at least in terms of discussion, which both the Palestinian, negotiators and seemingly Israel are talking about, and in, I guess, a more serious tone than they have been for quite some time. So one last thing that I did want to talk to you about on this piece, in this piece that you wrote, also, is this section around the transparency of betrayal, right? And you talk about Mahmoud Abbas, and that one of the things that has been said about him historically is, well, at least he's honest, at least he's truthful, even if he's a backstabber. I don't think you use the term backstabber, but even if it's in betrayal, right, that he tells you who he is, and kind of is honest from his perspective. But so on one level, you talk about how that could be seen as positive, right? Because it's not a duplicitous characteristic by him. But on the other side, you talk about kind of thinking about, what does it mean to have this figure of leadership that, even if he's derided by many, that he still has, I guess in the United States we use this term, the bully pulpit, right? But he still has the ability to talk and get his messaging out and all of this. And that, I think you're thinking about, like, over time, what is the impact of having somebody who's honest about the fact that they represent a politics of betrayal. So yeah, say a little bit more about this section.
Well, I mean, look, I think that there's a quite a disastrous relationship with nationalist politics historically between Palestinians and their dream, specifically when embodied in specific leaders that have historically sold Palestinians the need for sacrifice, or sometimes engaged in this type of politics of raising the stakes and compelling people to engage in confrontation and taking decisions to that effect. But eventually, you would see somebody moving down a different road or being hypocritical or talking to Israelis or negotiating or doing this kind of duplicitous act. And with Abu Mazen, a lot of people looked at him as this kind of honest guy that you get what you see, and he's not trying to lie at you. He does this kind of exercise in managing the expectations. And sometimes what is more dangerous for people is to believe for a moment and then have their belief destroyed or dismantled than not believing at all. Which, with Abu Mazen, that's what you get. It's maybe there's a hope he'll change, but at least you're not looking at him and it's like a snake you see, It's like that. And it's a snake you see is still terrifying, but it's not, as terrifying as a snake that, that surprises you. And with a snake you see, you can keep it at a distance, you can keep it away. But yeah, I think one of the problems with being transparent in Betrayal is that it's also there's that pain of seeing that transparency unfold without doing anything about it, or feeling impotent to do anything about it. Where that that transparency also. I'm sorry. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, it was just a little bit quiet, but yeah.
Where that transparency also leads to, a feeling of accumulation of frustration, of wanting to radically change the context of your relationship with this form of leadership or politics, but unable to do that. It's like being caught in this kind of toxic relationship where somebody's cheating, but and is transparent about it, and you're made to have to accept it on some level, and coming to terms with it. So there's that level to it, and I think one of the problems with it is that that very honesty becomes a fill-in, ideological fill-in for why Abu Mazen is better than anything else. It's like for a lot of people, it becomes like, at least he's not lying. At least he's not selling us hope. At least he's not, taking us down the road of what people in Arabic here call mughamara, which is, some sort of adventure. A lot of Palestinians who were against what Hamas decided on with Tufan al-Aqsa would call it an adventure. We don't need adventures. We need, more realistic, pragmatic form of, that's the line, that's the discourse that permeates a lot of talk. And with Abu Mazen, you get that. You get somebody will not raise your expectations, will remain steady, and that's his strong suit, and the major point that sells him to the people. No, let's put it that way. With, of course, economic lubrication, because if it's without the economic lubrication, these statements become less strong, if you want. And the second element, I think, is that this entire discourse is built on the strength of Israel itself. No, so it's using Israeli strength, Israeli power, Israeli monstrosity, its will to continue with this monstrosity, and to create this edifice and continue with it. And I think what is important about this kind of this position is that it's only true as long as Israel needs this system to cooperate with it. And as we said, repeatedly on this podcast, and as many Palestinians perhaps know but don't want to recognize, is that what in fact the Palestinian resistance in Gaza did was actually a preventive form of warfare, because Israel's fascism was growing without Tufan al-Aqsa. No, there was no talk of any diplomatic or political solution without Tufan al-Aqsa. It was preparing the grounds for this kind of high-tech machinery of killing before Tufan al-Aqsa. It was and staying silent and acquiescing to it does not mean that you'll be safeguarded from its wrath. It just means that the wrath will come at a point or a moment that the Israelis will choose or will find opportune to enact what they truly desire, which is the disappearance of the Palestinians and their physical existence, politically, socially, from the land of Palestine, from the river to the sea. So the problem with that edifice is that it takes this this desire. I mean, Abu Mazen takes this desire among the people to live a normal life, between quotes, to just raise kids and go to work and go to a restaurant on the weekend and do these kind of everyday activities without the burden of thinking, politics and what should be done. And he's honest about what he sells. The consumerist heaven with malls opening and shops and aesthetics of people even changing, if you want, in Palestine, with the spread of Instagram models and and having people teach everybody how to do makeup and put it on makeup, and with men also being infected with the latest fashion trends and engaging this kind of consumerist behavior and not necessarily being oriented towards these kind of collective questions, but living this kind of consumerist life that builds or constructs its meaning at least around some sort of close friends and families. That's it. Or even, I think even that is changing, and people are having less families and or postponing families and less friends as well, and more isolated and things I think we see elsewhere, but are coming late to Palestine, but coming through these kind of neoliberal economic flows and middle class consumerism. And Ramallah is now like any American small city with a mall and a cinema and all of these signs. We didn't have that for a long time, and now it's like everywhere. And at the same time, negating completely the political question. And we just need to be quiet. We shouldn't provoke the Israelis. They can eat most of the land in the West Bank, and hope that they will not eventually get rid of us because we're behaving well. That's the whole line, because the PA is not accumulating power to confront. It's not saying this is not a moment to confront, we should postpone it, but we're still accumulating the power of confrontation, or at least of taking a defensive posture, or at least of, if in the future the Israelis try to kick us out, we're ready to fight, or we have that will to stand our ground. There's none of that, no? It's completely placing yourself on the road of serfdom and being, completely under the aegis of Israeli security needs and desires, with some minimal resistance here and there, but it's a resistance of, for a long time, we're not going to engage in the Jenin operation. Now they are engaging in Jenin operation, and slowly and steadily they're breaking more of the taboos and more of the norms that surround some of the resistance, the quietest one that they placed against, the pressure coming from America and Israel to do more against the resistance, or against resistance fighters, or against the people themselves or their families, and etc., etc. So that is the problem of the layout here, and I think this honesty quite hides the inversion of values that this system needs. You know, who's a hero and who's not. If the martyr is a martyr, because if you're gonna really buy into, this ideological line of being honest in betrayal, you slowly also it becomes like it betrayal becomes less of a betrayal, no, and and betrayal disappears, and the entire inversion around the system, including killing the martyr, killing the hero, killing the resistance and its conceptual edifice and its values, these cardinal values from which it emanates, like generosity and love for the community, or friendship, or loyalty, or things like of that sorts. And when a martyr gets killed, in fact, he's not a martyr, or it's killing the conception of martyrdom itself. No, it's killing the conception of heroism itself. It's killing the conception of fighting back. It's killing the edifice, the matrix of meaning around that conception as well. So once you buy into it, that is a slow process of erosion of values around that. Having said so, I mean, I don't think that it's simply just a problem of one person like Abu Mazen, and I think it's more structural. That is what is intended by the PA. And the second thing I think that people should be aware of is that it's generally based on a lot of fear. So it's not like these arguments that you see from, I don't know, a lot of cultural and political theorists and critical theorists, where they speak of ideologies being everywhere and with us, like Zizek, for instance, or Gramsci and hegemony. And what I mean is that there's a lot of corrosion here. It's not just, there's a lot of brutal break the bones, destruction of people's lives, placing in prisons. The idea of people turning against resistance in Palestine would necessitate that there's a lot of brutal force being used to do that. And so this is not just, there is an ideological element to how people navigate this, what form of discourses they use to kind of renounce or denounce or distance themselves from resistance, or say it's not its time. And that's a discourse that has been there for some time, or really wanting to live a life without the clashes, without the fear of what would resistance bring. And I've always said this in our podcast, and some people would not really truly understand what I was saying, is that when a resistance event, specifically today in Palestine, whether it's in Gaza, among also a lot of Palestinians in Gaza, whether it's in the West Bank or anywhere else, I don't think there is that consensus that used to be around it. But I also think that beyond the whole consensus being around it, I think that it does, in many instances, also bring forth the nightmare as much as the dream, no? And what I mean by it is that it's not the resistance event that brings the nightmare. It's just the fear that resistance and its actions also disrupt some sort of everyday flows that people have come to grow attached to, no matter how horrific these everyday rhythms are, or no matter how unfree you feel, or no matter how dystopic they are. There's a level that it can always get worse, no? And that's one of the problems of how resistance is able to both bring forth also the desire to break free from the system that controls you, but at the same time to conjure up, the possibility of nightmare, the possibility that you could dream of freedom, but then you still are caught in the same loop, or being betrayed by own leaders, or losing people who you love, or losing a lot of money in your home and your house, and being forced to, like what's happening in Gaza, being forced to move from one place to another every couple of days, or so there's a lot of things around resistance because of this kind of technique of torture that Israel uses, where it links your act of resistance with its use of its monstrous power to try and dismantle and sear Palestinian consciousness in a way that rejects and renounces resistance to the extent possible. So there's a lot of that, but it's not just a ideological buy-in. It's because I go to the mall, I believe in Abu Mazen, or that kind of thing. It's just because there's a lot of corrosion, and there's a lot of killings and torture in prisons, and horrific stories of people. And there's Gaza being dismantled in front of your eyes on TV, mediated through the screens, and hearing people's voices, and knowing friends from there and people from there who are suffering, and seeing all of this happening at once. And for a lot of people, politics becomes a place that they just want to stay away from, and being concerned with their own everyday life, and not thinking about the power of the collective, or the question of what to be done. And for many, that's the way. I would say that's even the mainstream disposition of people at this moment.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as I was reading this piece and as we're having this conversation, I mean, one of the threads through all of our talks, through our earliest talks, that comes back to me is that part of the interventions that you wanted to make at the outset was to push back against what you knew. I mean, what were already discourses that were circulating, but you knew that they would circulate because of the kind of the power and history and of these discourses, which is this discourse sort of that resistance is ultimately futile, that resistance does produce its own defeat in a certain way, right? That Foucault, as you talked about, like the power is able to sort of reconstitute. And so I'm curious for you, because you're in this place now where you are seeing this rise of this this collaborationist, cooperative kind of ideology, and a distancing of people from resistance after 14 months of, how do you reckon with, I mean, how do you feel about that problem now?
I mean, I think this is the moment where, intellectuals specifically, I mean, writing in Arabic, I'm not here speaking about English, who want to defend the idea of resistance need to defend it. This is the moment you defend it. This is the moment. This is not the moment to turn against it. It's not the moment to create, a revisionist streak. And a lot of people are going down that road, unfortunately, even on the intellectual level. Like, we need to rethink all our conceptions, and reality is different than our illusion. Like that's a common now refrain. Although I think what they say is completely old and nothing new in it. And this is the irony of it, is that they think they're really revising something and like reaching new conclusions, but it's all kind of psychological, feelings of guilt coupled with inability to act, and feeling paralyzed, and not being able to meet the conditions of the call that was asked from us at the moment of October 7th, seeing Israel slightly prepared to conduct its war in Lebanon. In the West Bank, there's also this kind of like, hope that came from these forces that now people have to reckon with, that hope of an outside savior might be postponed for a long time, whether it's Gaza or Lebanon. But again, look, there's always hope in hopelessness. And I know this is a strange element or terms, but there's also sometimes hope specifically in the West Bank, when the fabric of what we knew before and how the world was arranged in our minds and consciousness is changing. Some of what is changing could lead to a more confrontational politics, not at this particular moment, but in the near future. And not only because we want it, but because also the settlers are looking after it, or will also pursue it on their own terms. Whether we resist or we don't resist, they will pursue it. So that would also force Palestinians to reckon with that, which is a different form of reckoning. It's not a reckoning with only the efficacy or the non-efficacy of resistance and what type of resistance and how we should do that. And I do think that a lot of people at this particular moment can't also read in any objective sense a lot of the successes that also this battle, if we want, or this round with Israel brought forth, whether on the level of unveiling of Israel's monstrosity to the world, or on the level of politicizing a new generation, reminding the Arab world of Palestine, its importance and centrality, preventing some of the normalization agreements from at least going on comfortably. We don't know where things will go in the future, but at least there's a lot of successes, including the success in denying Israel, at least for now, a total victory, as they claim that they will have. And despite Israeli having some success in the north, specifically with Hezbollah, and a change of regime in Syria, which they also might in the future regret. We don't know what will happen in the future. They might also savor, I don't know what will exactly happen in Syria, how things will turn out there. At least nothing is certain also in the terms of the situation. There's different currents also within this kind of Syrian rebel forces. Some of them are less of, as loyal to like a Western agenda, or things might change in some direction that is not really in line with Israeli interests as well. Maybe not. Maybe they will all be in line with Israeli interests as well. But it remains a question, at least also for me personally. I'm not sure where things will go. So I think that level of it for a lot of people, demands some sort of revision and recognition and acknowledgement and problems. And of course, there's a lot of critical thinking that needs to be placed into what happened, what unfolded, and what and what was achieved and what was not achieved, and was it worth it or was it not worth it? Although I think that's a secondary or lesser of a question than assessing it and continuing forth with it. But again, there's a lot of hope and hopelessness, and I think there's this moment where people are, deep in their own sorrow, turning towards themselves more, reflecting, looking at the intensity of the events that have unfolded in the past year or so, hoping for a quick end of the war in Gaza that will see some sort of ceasefire hopefully soon, and licking wounds and having a more concrete and perhaps less psychologically motivated discussion around this. I mean, not that psyche does not play a role in all of our discussions, but discussions that don't come from this kind of internalized anger that people don't know where to throw, so they throw at Facebook in a defeatist or self-defeating manner, or they throw it wherever they throw it in a way that does not actually look at the war and its unfolding and how it turned out in a much more objective sense. There's much that Israel lost here, including the fact that it will not be able to really erase completely, which is that its army is not as strong as it looks, that it's defeatable, that a small force from Gaza, already a besieged place, manufacture its own weapon, was able to defeat, its southern command. That it had a failure of intelligence. That it's some minds in Gaza Strip with the will to fight were able to overcome its forces. We were able to still conduct a guerrilla warfare that cost them. There's a lot will be learned from this episode, including what it means to have a will to fight despite having the conditions against you. And I think that's one of the lessons also for other forces in the region that want to have an anti-hegemonic and anti-imperial form of power. It's not only about accumulating numbers or economies, or it's also about simply having that hard fought will to fight and to continue. And it came on a large toll on the Gaza Strip, specifically its civilian population. I think that's the weakest link in terms of this war for the Palestinians, and specifically for the Palestinians in Gaza and for the resistance movement in Gaza. But there's a lot of elements for me that do not spell total disaster. But a lot of people disagree with me, and when you make that argument, a lot of people will say you're wrong and it's a total disaster, and 1, 2, 3. Some will even say this is a worse Nakba than the Nakba that happened in 1948. People have different opinions. I mean, I don't fall there. I might be mistaken. I might be clinging to some, I don't know, some sort of foolish sense of things, but I don't see it as the complete disaster as a lot of people are spelling out in their articles and in their readings of this. I think there's much in this war that can be drawn, but I think in moments of loss, in moments where things that you're used to quite rapidly change, it's quite hard to keep up with the intensity and the flow of information. There's a lot of panic that happens, and there's a lot of room for misreadings and for entrenchments of sensibilities of defeat, and unfortunately that is the problem with some of the intellectuals, at least in the Arab world, that they're only doubling down on that instead of doing a better job in being intellectuals and assessing from a much more objective sense of the word. Let's put it that way.
Right on. Last, I'll just take you out of here with this question. As usual with a lot of your commentary, you're analyzing a lot from what you're seeing within Palestine, and different moods and analyses and threads that are coming up among Palestinian people, particularly in the West Bank where you are. If you were in the United States or in the West right now, and you were thinking about what are the things that I should be doing to express, my solidarity, or to put pressure, or whatever, I know people are already doing all of those things, but do you have thoughts on, what you would do in that situation?
Well, I mean, if I was in the US, if I'm a community organizer, I think that I would place front and center in my organizing Palestine as an issue, not only as an issue where you have to study a history and culture of a peoples out there in the Middle East, but as an issue of how it ties back to the empire, how it unravels truth around institutions that you interact with on the everyday, even in North America, etc. So there's one level to that that I would include in your pedagogy, in your teaching, and that should be a continuous practice that has not to do with just the trends on the news. And that's, I think, important in terms of building an edifice of a long last impact, specifically on the level of the grassroots, moving on and forward as well. I think the second element that I would think of is that in terms of organizing, or in terms of politics or engagement with established political parties, that Palestine would remain an issue that I would raise in every meeting, whatever it is that you're going to, whatever type of engagement that you have. pushing, whether it's organized forms of politics or electoral politics, or whether you're in a political party somewhere, or that should be a position that is, spelled out clearly in your statements, that remains a fixture in your own sense of the world and your own disposition towards, let's say, the world at large. And that Palestine, is placed also within, a whole edifice of political agenda that he would place. There is other things that could be done on the level of people to people, which include, donating for people and helping out with, any kind of reconstruction that will happen in the Gaza Strip, trying to mobilize people around that as well. That would also be helpful on multiple fronts for people who can or have the will to donate or work or whatever it is, or volunteer in some capacity or other to help in these sense, or on that level. That would also be great. But I think for me, that's what is important, is that we shouldn't have just events that throw out a trend, and then after this trend we move to the second trend and the third trend in this world. And I think if this moment is a true moment of politicization, then Palestine becomes this issue that unravels something about the world we live in, again, as I always say, in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania or in New York or wherever you are, or maybe. And I think it tells you a lot about the type of, I don't know, class alliance that rules you, or the type of foreign policy and that needs to be sustained, and why is it sustained? The question of empire and imperialism in our world today, the relationship between peoples and the possibility of different relationship and to emerge if this form of imperialism is defeated. What type of politics we want to have moving forward. But again, for people organizing, for people teaching, for people, that should be a constant fixture in your teaching, in your work, in your engagement with organized or electoral politics, and of course, including heeding the call of the boycott and divestment movement that Palestinians have, called on, and extracting as much as possible a price from the Israeli state and its institutions and its representative, that genocide is not okay, that they should not be given impunity, and that price, whether can be extracted through non-engagement with these institutions or through I don't know, legal course of action or whatever people can do in this front, that would be also great as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again. This was, as always, really enlightening and great conversation. Always good to be with you and be in conversation.
Thank you, Jared. It's great to be with you too.
All right. Peace.